Hello friends, welcome back. In this video, we shall look at an interesting enhancement to the Fortune Teller game, which as you know is a part of our advanced scratch curriculum at YByte, where we'll make this wizard a little bit more tolerant. Now, before I move further, I want to highlight that this particular thing that we are going to look at is really like a bonus idea. And remember the basic rule that bonus comes after basic, right? So, which means that if you really want to try this stuff, and it is quite involved, in fact, if you want to try this stuff, I would recommend that you first get familiar with the basic concepts of the lists and so on that are used in this game. Now, moving forward, remember the fortune teller game is this interesting game where we have this wizard who answers our questions, and the wizard itself does that because its answers are all stored inside a list, right? So we first prepare this list with a particular broadcast. We add all these elements to the list, and hence this list wizard answer gets prepared, from which the wizard keeps answering our questions. Now, as wizard answers our questions, it also tracks our questions. What that means is that it keeps track of what we are asking. And in the game that we built in the class, we find that if we repeat a question, right? So for example, if I say, am I good? Say I ask twice, then the wizard gets angry and it just leaves. So that's just a game that we have built. But the question that comes up is, can I make my wizard a little bit more tolerant, right? What that means is that perhaps it can allow us to ask a question, maybe say twice or thrice before it gets angry and leaves, right? So now this is actually a very, very interesting enhancement to the game. And I'm going to discuss in this video both how, let's say, the concept of it, and also show you some development of the code around this, right? Now, the interesting bit here is this is all about lists. Lists are powerful. You'll see the power of list as we go along with this. Now, the question that I'll ask you to think about, right, and so that it becomes more intuitive, is that how will you do something like this in day-to-day life? Let's say you are a wizard and somebody is asking you, a bunch of questions, and you want to keep track of how many times this question has been asked, right? It's actually very simple. You do it all the time when you play with your friends and so on and so forth. You probably will maintain a normal notebook, pencil, paper, and probably you'll make a table, something like this, right? So for every question you mark, okay, this has been asked once, this has been asked twice, this has been asked maybe say 7 times. We all like this kind of counting. It's nice and we do it all the time, right? And maybe this has been asked twice, right? So what I'm getting at is that the same idea we are going to now implement in the code, right? So look at this. We have this one list of questions, and we need to just create one more list here which can tell us how many times a particular question has been asked. And that's exactly what we're going to do in code as well. So we are going to just create another list here which will tell us how many times this question has been asked, right? So for instance, my questions are here. I'm going to maintain a list says how many times asked, and for every question, so I'll keep a corresponding number which tells me how many times this question has been asked. So for instance, it's possible that, am I good has been asked once, are you sad has been asked once, will it rain has been asked twice, and are you angry has been asked once, and so on, right? Now, with this in place, what exactly are we going to do, right? So just give you a picture before you get onto the code so that it becomes easier to understand. When a question is asked, we first determine if it has been previously asked, right? How do you do that? Well, we were doing it already because we are looking at the list of the previous questions, right? So if it's been already asked, let's say it's been asked. So what we do is that we first determine when this question was first asked. So maybe it was question number 1 or question number 2, or say question number 3, whatever it was. So we first determine where it was first asked, and then we go to this list, how many times asked, and increase the specific item. Because remember, we have to be careful on which element we are increasing in that list. Is exactly as this table, right? Remember, this table here, we have to be very clear on where we put this extra number, right? So now we go and increase the specific item. Then we determine if this question has been asked too many times, right? Now too many times could be 2, could be 3, whatever. If yes, then we get angry. If no, we just proceed to answer as usual, right? And if this question has not been asked to the previous questions, that means it's a new question. We must add this to a list of tables, and we must add a 1 here, which is same as saying that in this table, for example, a new question comes up, and so we must enter it here, and we must put a 1 next to it. So exactly same logic. I mean, if first you understand this, it becomes a lot easier to understand. It becomes a lot easier to visualize, but you will also see the power of lists in all of this that we are doing, right? So let's let's kind of implement all of this that we've talked about in the code, right? So what we will do is that I've taken here a copy of the fortune teller game, right? It's the same game as in the class. So here, remember, when we get this broadcast asked, I determine if your questions contains answer, which means if the question has been previously asked, you just kind of exit. whereas otherwise you answer, right? So now we are going to enhance this by making the wizard say a little bit more tolerant, as using the ideas that we just discussed, right? So let's first start with this situation where, let's say, the question is a new question, right? So, okay, first of all, like I said, I'm going to create a new list. So I'll go here and I'll say in variables, I'll say make a list, and I'll say just say how many times asked. I mean, I just name that I gave a long name, but so that it's very clear what we are trying to do, right? So I just call it say how many times asked, and this list is right now empty. In fact, like all other lists, I will, when the flag is clicked, I will, say clean up these blocks. uh, I will first make sure that this list is completely empty, right? So I'll say delete all of, let's say how many times asked, right? So this is important because, otherwise the previous history remains, right? As we saw in the class as well. Now, with this done, right, let's assume that the question that is asked is a new question, right? Which means when the execution comes here, it does not go inside this if, instead it comes inside the else. So which means the question gets answered, as usual. I add this answer to your questions. Now I will also go and add, right? I'll add, let's say, 1 to the how many times asked. Now what this will do, remember, is that how many times asked is this list which is maintaining how many times the previous questions have been asked, right? So I have added the new question to the your questions, and hence I must add 1 to how many questions asked. Now notice that this add will automatically make sure that the right element of this list is getting added. It's just like how I showed you in the table, basically adding one more row to the table, on both on the questions as well as how many times asked. So really that's all we need to do when the question is new, right? And we can actually see this happen now. So let's say I'll take this your question and this, and maybe we'll just start the game. So I say welcome to my magic. Maybe I'll move this here, right? So it tells me, so ask me a question. So I'll say so let's say, are you sad? So I'll say, are you sad? Now this is a new question, so it answers me, and so okay, fine. It adds your questions and it asks how many times asked. Let's say ask a new question, are you happy? Right now, again, this is not an old question, this is a new question. So I will, I again just add this here and add 1 here. So notice there's a correspondence now. 1 time this has been asked, 1 time this has been asked, and so on, right? Now we'll proceed and we'll look at the situation where this question is previously a part of the list of your questions, right? That's where it's a little bit more tricky, but we'll do this step by step so that it kind of becomes clear, right? So basically, remember now, if this list already contains the question, then we must figure out where this question is, right? So this question, for example, if I ask, are you happy right now? So I must go and update second item of this list, right? Which means that I must first figure out when this question was asked, right? Because if not, I'm just going to be, adjusting a wrong row of this list, right? And that's going to be a problem for me, right? So what I will do is that I will create a new variable here, right? I'll make a variable here called, let's say, I'll call it when first asked, right? So let me be for all sprites, and the whole idea of this variable is that I want to make sure that this particular question, if it has been asked before, I want to make sure when it was asked for the very first time, right? So what I can do here is I can say, it's this code already. So here, this code is condition where this question has been asked before. So I'll say, I will say set, for instance. So I'll go here and say set, say when first asked to. Now, how do I know this question? When was it first asked? Remember, I can use item number of answer in your questions, right? And why is that? Why is it going to work? Because, for example, item number of 1, item number of are you sad is 1, item number of 2, item number of are you happy is 2, right? So if I basically find out, let's say the question is, are you happy? I ask, well, set when first asked to item number of, there you go. So I say item number of, answer in your questions, right? Now be careful on these lists, because if you get the wrong list, it's going to be all over the place, right? So I say set when first asked to item number of answers in your list. Now I can decide whether this question has been asked too many times or not, right? So maybe for now I'll just move this thing away. So I'm going to put one more if else here, because that's where the decision is, whether this question has been asked more than the stipulated number of times, right? So for example, now I'll say that, look, if So basically, I know this question is, let's say, question number 2. I can go and look at this list and see what is in there, right? So if this particular item is more than the numbers that I'm allowed to ask, right? So I'm going to say if, I'm going to put an operator here, greater than, let's say greater than. So I'll say if, and again, be careful on this because, this item and item number look similar, but they are not really, right? So I'll say if item, when first asked, where's this thing? So as item when first, if item when first asked of how many times asked is say greater than say 2, right? So which means that, if it's 3 or more, then that's a problem, right? So I'm allowed to ask 3 questions 3 times, but beyond that, I'll not allow you, right? So if it's greater than 2, for instance, then I can say you made me angry by asking this question again, like we were doing earlier. And I can just say, let's say, basically say that, okay, look, you've already asked me this question and at, let's say, item number of questions at answer. So it will tell me where this question was first asked, right? And besides that, it's everything remains the same, right? Now, on the other hand, let's say I find that this question has not been asked enough number of times. So for example, I was looking for say 3 or more, which is greater than 2, but this question has been asked only once before, right? Which means that I'm going to have to proceed with the answer. But I must make sure that when I ask, for example, are you happy? It has been asked once. So I must make sure that this number becomes 2. Remember, in your notebook and table example, you would add one more, you will basically add a counter there, right? So you'll say, okay, this question has come in a second time, right? So what I will do is that I'm going to have to add one to this. And the way you can do that in Scratch is that you're going to say, replace this item, right? So replace item, let's say here, replace item. And which item should you basically replace will be basically the same item when first asked of this list, how many times asked, right? So it's the same like, which row you are at. So I'll say replace this item when first asked, of this item. Instead of this, I will make it this plus 1, right? And how do I do that? Well, we'll make it, let's say this plus 1, right? So I'll say, okay, so this, I'll again go to this item. Now with lists, it's a little bit, you have to do it a bit slowly, but it works, right? So I mean, if you're careful, it works, but if you have to be careful, right? Okay, so I'll say item when first asked, variables, right? So when first asked plus 1, right? I mean, all I'm doing really is that I'm just increasing this number by 1. So which means the question has been asked again. Now, once I've done this amount of bookkeeping, then I really will be polite enough to just answer the question. And I'll say that, okay, look, this question can be answered. So I'll pretty much follow exactly, say, this part of the code, right? But I do not need to, add anything to, let's say, let's say to the list and so on and so forth, right? So because that part has been taken care already, right? So I will not do these two things and I'll just say broadcast ask, right? So because broadcast crystal ball, say this item and then broadcast ask again, right? So with this happens, I will put this code here, right? Now this looks a little bit complicated, but let's see it working so that becomes a little bit more clear as to what's going on, right? So I will say the game starts, every list is empty. First, let's say I say, right, welcome to my magic room. One out to answer. So I'll say, ask me yes or no question. Say, am I happy? That's my first question. So your questions becomes, am I happy? And how many times is 1? So I say, am I sad? Let's say. Right. So now let's say I again ask, am I happy? Notice that it became twice, but my wizard went on to answer because I am allowed to ask 2 times, 3 times in fact, because more than 2 is where the problem comes. So I can in fact again ask, am I happy? And this has become 3 now, right? So wizard still answers me, right? And then it says, okay, go ask me one more question. So this time let's say I ask, am I, am I a good person? Good person. Now this is a completely new question, so wizard will just add it to the list, right? So you may be right and wizard just adds it to the list and nothing happens. But then let's say again go and ask, am I happy? Right, now when I do this, notice wizard is now angry because this number is more than 2, right? And when that happens, wizard just disappears, right? So that is the idea, go through this slowly. It will take a little bit of thinking to understand, but really the code is following the logic that I said, that if the number is contained there, figure out where this question was asked, go and update this how many times asked, and if how many times was asked was more than a threshold. So for example, if it's more than 2, which means it's 3 or more, right? Then just abort the game, right? Just like we were doing earlier. Now, in fact, this works fine, and if you do this, I would say it's amazing. You definitely deserve a bonus, right? Because this is a little bit tricky, right? However, if you really think about it, right, this particular implementation has a small shortcoming, which I don't expect you guys to probably implement this, but I still want to make it clear to you because it also highlights some interesting things about lists, right? The problem or shortcoming is that now we can tell when the question was first asked, but we will not be able to tell when all this question has been asked, which means that let's say this question was asked in question number 1, question number 2, question number 3, question number 8, and so on and so forth. We will not be able to tell that. So the question comes, can I somehow make it happen that I tell you, okay, look, you asked me this question 3 times, question number 1, then question number 2, then question number 7, or whatever, right? Well, the answer is yes. Like I said, it starts to get more and more involved. So please be careful about this. Be clear with your basics if you really want to try all of this. But it's fine if you do not also. Yeah. But again, we are going to require more lists, right? So how can we make sure that? How can we tell that this question was asked previously? Well, somehow the title has got cut here, but never mind. The idea here is that again we will maintain a list which is all the questions, right? So basically, including repeats. If I maintain another list which is say your questions all, then I can somehow, once I know that this question has been, has this condition has come in, then I can basically go and look through this list, and then I can figure out, okay, look, this question was asked, say for example, will it train was asked question number 3 as well as question number 5, right? But in fact, we can use item number to find out, but there's still a challenge because item number in this kind of a list will return you only the first occurrence of this item. So for example, if I run this on, your questions all, you will find that item number will return me number 3, but not number 5, right? So how do we handle this? Well, again, gets complicated, but good to think about it. What we can do is that we can first get number 3, then delete number 3 from the list, and then go and search once again. So I'll get 4, but remember the question asked, because I've removed one question, so the question asked will be in fact question number 5, right? Like I said, this is a little bit involved. If you're not able to fully follow it, never mind, come back to it later. This is showing you all that lists can do. I just want to leave you with one sort of food for thought for you, that if you could somehow limit the unique number of questions the player could ask, then we could keep recording when all a player has given a particular question, right? So for example, in your normal textbook example, along with those markings, you could also ask, okay, look, am I good was once asked, it was asked question number 1, are you sad was question number 2, will it train was question number 3 and 5, are you angry was question number 4, right? Now the thing that you have to think about, and it in fact points to a very interesting let's say limitation of Scratch in a way, is that why is that I'm saying that the number of questions has to be limited, which means that if I say that the wizard can answer, the player can ask only 10 unique questions, then I can do something like this, right? But if I do not know how many unique questions are going to be asked, it's actually quite difficult to do this, right? So that's why I did not look at this example, because this would have meant creating many more lists, and each list contains, which question it has been asked. So again, lists, like I said, are powerful, but never mind. Before I leave you, I'll just show you an implementation of this method. It's also interesting, but like I said, if it's getting overwhelming, come back to this later, right? So like I said, first I will create a new list. I'll just call it your questions all, right? So which means including, let's say, repetitions, I will keep storing the questions inside this list. Right now, again, whenever I create a list, first when the game starts, I'm going to delete everything, right? So I'll say delete all of, your questions asked, right? So delete all of your questions all, right? So because, all the questions have to be deleted, right? Now, once again, we come to this path here, this same loop here. Now, remember, if the question is new, then of course it has to be added to the your questions. It also has to be added to, so I'm going to have to duplicate this particular line. I'll also, just for the bookkeeping sake, I'll also add this to your questions all, because new question definitely has to go in to both the list, right? Because whether it's your questions or your questions all, both must get updated, right? The painful part comes when the question has been repeated, right? Now, in this case also, which means, if the your questions contains this answer, then I still need to add this to your questions all, because remember my your questions all is all the questions including repetitions, right? So I'll say, for example, add, let's say add um, answer to, because remember answer is what the question is contained in. So I'll say add answer to your questions all, right? So remember this list I'm containing, which contains all the questions, whether it's repeated, not repeated, it doesn't matter, right? Now, once we come to a point where a question has been asked too many times, right? So for instance here, right? So for instance here right now, it tells me the very first time the question was asked, I can tell you, but I want to do a little bit more. So I want to do at this point, I want to check my list to see where all this question was asked, right? So what I will do is that I will, you know, give it a broadcast, and I'll just in fact give it a broadcast and wait, because I want all this to get over. So let's say I'll call this broadcast new message. I'll just say call it check earlier questions, check earlier questions. So I'll say check earlier questions and wait, because I want all this to get over before the game proceeds, right? And what do I do in this particular broadcast? Remember, I'm going to have to sift through, going to have to look through that list of all the questions and figure out where all this question has been received. Now this, like I said, is a little bit tricky. You know, if it's becoming overwhelming, just leave it here for now, come back to it a little later, right? So I'm just going to set up a variable also. I'll tell you the meaning of this a little later. So I'll say call it temp. So let's say, so I'll say set temp to 0. Now I'm going to repeat this until this list no longer has my question, right? So I'll say repeat until, there you go. So repeat until, let's say item number of answer in questions is 0, right? So which means it's also saying as repeat until the list your questions all does not contain my item. So I can just make it, you know, in fact, I can just do this way, right? So repeat until the list, wait a minute. So repeat until, I can use a not operator. So I say not, list contains, the list, where is the list contains? Yeah, there you go. So not list your questions all contains the answer, right? So now basically what am I doing here, right? It'll become a bit more clear as we put together the entire code. So I'm going to find out how many places this your question all this answer exists, and I'm going to keep deleting that place, because remember, if I do not do that, then I always get the first answer to be answered, right? So that's how the item number works, right? So what I will do is that I'll set one more variable here, say make a variable question number, right? For all sprites, let it be. So I'll say set question number to, what will I set it to? I'll say set question number to item number of answer in your question solved, right? So that's the first time the question was asked. So I'll say, well, item, item number of answer in, so be careful of this list again, in your questions also. All your questions, I'm going to sift through that list, set it to item number of this, and then I'm just going to say, let's say here the looks, I go say let's say this, say join apple banana. Okay, so join apple banana. You asked this question. So you asked this question at question number with a small space there, and at the question number, let me just put this together and tell you why I'm doing this. It could be a little bit confusing, but never mind. If you think about it, you'll understand, right? So it will be question number plus temp, right? Now, why am I doing? Okay, 1 minute plus. So question number plus temp, right? So why am I doing this? Remember, because what happens is that, like I told you, when we query this list, we first find 3, but then we go and remove. So once 3 is there, we go and remove this item from the list. So this item is no longer there, and hence what I'll get the next time is is item number 4, but that means the question was asked at question number 5, right? So to account for that, I'm doing this thing. Like I said, it's okay if you don't fully understand this, you can come back to this later. I'll say change, say temp by 1, And then I must, and this is an important point, I must delete, let's say, question number, because the question number is where the particular question was. So I go and say delete question number of how many, question number of your questions, all right. So now best is to just see this working for ourselves. So let's say I start this game, right? So I ask me yes or no question. So I'll say, am I happy, right? So what happens? It says doesn't look like it, right? My question appears in your questions as well as your questions all, and ask one time. So I say, let's say, am I sad, right? So I ask it again, and this time it goes in your questions. It doesn't answer, 1 1, and also comes in your questions all. Let's say I ask, am I happy, right? So what happens now is that this becomes 2, this is 1, and notice here I've got am I happy again, right? So I'll keep on asking this, am I happy? Because I can ask, I can ask one more time, and then it will get angry, right? So I'll ask one more time here, right? So it's a tolerant wizard, so I'm happy. Now, so it said you asked me question number 1, but now see what happens. It asked me question number 1, this list get deleted. Question number 3, this gets deleted. Question number 4, and question number 5, right? So this lists keep on getting deleted. Little bit advanced, but if you think about it, you'll get this, right? So like I said, bonus is always after basics. So make sure you do the basics, get it clear, and if you observe, even if you do not do, let's say, this part of the code, it's all right, right? So make sure, you just enjoy the process. Yeah, take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.